Turn it over to Liz, and Liz, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's really lovely to, well, see your names over here on the side of the screen, and I can see where people are coming from. My name is Liz Maurer, and I'm here to talk to you today about Christmas, and specifically Williamsburg Christmas traditions and wreath making. Before we started, we were kind of chatting a little bit about my day job. So I love doing history, and I love doing these talks during the day. I work for the National Museum of the United States Army, where I'm in charge of the education program there. So if any of you find yourself in Northern Virginia and have some time any day of the week between 9 and 5, I hope that you will come on down south of Alexandria and check out our museum. Yeah, and Robert put the URL in the chat.
Yeah, and I posted it in the link, and they have a lot of cool online programs as well, author talks and things like that. So you should check those out as well if you can't visit the museum in person.
Yes, I'm going to do one. I think it's, I think I told you I'm going to do it in April, called Martha Washington Goes to Camp.
Oh, I want to go to that. Okay, I'll join you for that.
All right. Okay. So I am pleased to see you. I'm going to say, like, judging by the number of lights that are in my neighborhood, we are very deeply into the Christmas season this year. And tonight we're going to talk about essentially Christmas and the traditions that have grown up around Christmas. First, we're going to explore how Christmas was celebrated in Colonial Virginia. So that's your historical background. Then we're going to talk about the 20th century, which is about how Colonial Williamsburg invented its very distinctive way of celebrating Christmas. And then I'm going to show you how to design and construct a Williamsburg-style wreath. And then for those of you who don't celebrate Christmas or are not so much into it, you can take all of these principles of putting together natural materials and just make a really beautiful seasonal wreath with hopefully the kind of flora that are native or easily found in a particular part of the world in which you live, right? For those of you who are maybe not so sure if you're interested in the how to make a wreath part, you should stick around anyway, because it's a lot of fun and I have a lot of stories. What I'm going to do first is to share my screen, because yes, indeed, I have a PowerPoint presentation. Here we go. So this is a photo of the interior of Pohick Church, which is located down in Lorton, Virginia, not too far from where I am during the daytime. And we're starting here in a church because Christmas is one of the two most important feast days in the Anglican Church. And in Colonial Virginia, the Anglican Church was the established church. So the other important feast day is Easter. The liturgical calendar was divided into seasons. We are currently in the season of Advent, which commences 4 Sundays before Christmas and is really the beginning of the liturgical year. And then within this church, it was a time of reflection and contemplation with fasting encouraged. It wasn't quite the commercial holiday that we see today. So the first day of Christmas is December 25th. It marks Jesus' birth. Christmas continues for 12 days afterwards, culminating on January 6th, which is Epiphany. And Epiphany is the day that the Magi arrived in Bethlehem, recognizing the baby as Christ the Savior. So Christmas continued until February 2nd, which is also called Candlemas, and also known as the Purification of the Virgin. So Christmas actually is a 40-day cycle within that liturgical calendar, right? But in Virginia, Christmas was celebrated in kind of a more secular way, especially as we get towards the middle point and the end of the 18th century, where we see that Philip Vickers-Fithian of New Jersey, so I'm going to tell you a quote, who's a tutor to the Carter family of Nomonite Hall, recorded his first Virginia Christmas experience December 18th, 1773. And he says, "Nothing is now to be heard in conversation but the balls, the fox hunts, the fine entertainments, and the good fellowship which are to be exhibited at the approaching Christmas. I almost think myself happy that my horse's loneliness will be sufficient excuse for my keeping at home on these holidays." So what he's saying is that Philip Bithyne was a tutor from New Jersey, so it's a very different religious environment, secular environment, comes down to these freewheeling, frolicking, party-loving Virginians. And he's a little bit surprised at the kind of lack of seriousness that he sees in the holiday season, how it becomes kind of an excuse for a series of parties. But one of the important things that he notes in his diary, Christmas morning, he was waked this morning by guns fired all around the house. And that's one of the first references that we see in the record to the Virginian habit of firing guns on Christmas morning. How fun is that? Here we're looking at two English prints that each were part of a different monthly series. Both of them are titled December, and they both show women who are collecting and decorating with green, so decorating the holidays. Right? The one lady you can see has some holly that she's put into her apron, and then the other lady over here is, working on putting together, I think it's probably a pomander, so something that's going to smell really nice for the holiday season. So Christmas customs, these are both English prints, spread to England by the end of the 6th century. They later reach Scandinavia when it becomes fused, the Christmas holiday, with the pagan Norse midwinter feast known as Yule. So if you hear about Yule logs, that actually goes back to the pagan North. In the 9th century, during the rule of King Alfred, the Christmas celebration was extended by 12 days, which is when we have it ending on Epiphany. Early in the 11th century, the term Christus Mas, or the Festival of Christ, enters the English language, and then it's early in the next century, the Christmas, or the word Christmas, really comes into use. So Anglicans, Roman Catholics, Lutherans, Moravians, all celebrated this traditional Christmas season with both religious and secular observances. And these particular celebrations in 18th century America were observed by the aforementioned communities, especially in cities like New York, Philadelphia, in places like the Middle Atlantic colonies of New York, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and well into the South. So you can see there's hundreds of years of tradition that's attached to this particular season. So natural items like lavender, rose petals, really pungent herbs, rosemary, bay, were scattered throughout churches in the winter, providing this really pleasant holiday scent. So if you think of particular aromas with Christmas, you may be thinking about something like a really pungent rosemary or bay leaf as something that you associate with that holiday season. And the scented flowers and herbs were chosen in particular because they are aromatic and they're considered this sort of alternative to a form of incense. The Reverend George Herbert, who's an Anglican clergyman from Maryland, urges that the church be swept and kept clean without dust or cobwebs, and a great festival strewed and stuffed with boughs and perfumed with incense. And Virginians decorated their homes in exactly the same way, although most likely reserving one or two of the main rooms for these holiday observances. Okay. So there are a number of different kinds of plants that are associated with Christmas, predominantly because they're associated with being available at that time of year. This is a print from the 18th century. And if you could get really deep down there underneath it, you'll see that it reads Royal Purpular Ocula, African White Flowers, pansies, heartsease, strawberry daisies, so on and so forth. This particular print was issued in 1730 by a London nurseryman named Robert Ferber. And he publishes a set of these 12 prints, one for each month of the year, that depicts the flowers that were in bloom for that particular month. So it's almost like a catalog for the kinds of things that you could get from his nursery. Very clever marketing. And they were designed as this marketing scheme in order to promote his nursery, which was near Kensington. This was essentially the first illustrated seed catalog published in England. And by having resources like this, we know the kinds of things that were available to people at that time of year that they might have been using to decorate their houses. Right? But like I said before, Christmas was pretty much secularized by the 18th century in both England and Virginia. This is a print that is a tavern scene. So if we're looking at birthday celebrations as being somewhat heathen at this particular time, the earliest Christians paid little attention to Jesus's birth. So it's not known exactly when the church began to celebrate Christmas, right? But the first reference goes to 336, when the Roman Church began to celebrate a feast of the Nativity on December 25th. By observing Jesus' birthday on that day, these pagan traditions become associated with the winter solstice, and things like wassail bowls, the use of holly and other evergreens for decoration come to be incorporated into this new Christian celebration. And decorating one's home with ivy and other greenery was another tradition whose roots were dug deep into pagan Europe and were another feature of the Roman Saturnalia that stretched from December 17th to 24th. So that's first created as a celebration for Saturnus, the god of agriculture. It evolves into an all-you-can-think-of kind of festival of this unbridled joy. The 13th century historian Matthew Paris has said it was characterized by processions, singing, lighting candles, adorning the house with laurel and green trees, giving presents, and men dressed as women or masqueraded in the hides of animals. So it's these three ancient traditions really become fused into the idea of Christmas, and only one of them is really Christian. So the earliest tied to the winter solstice and the importance of ensuring the sun's return for another fertile spring. This custom was added to by the Romans, who created this week-long Saturnalia, which is the New Year's festival in honor of the god Saturn, the sower of seeds. And then this final layer of meaning is added by medieval Christianity, which regularly saw that its attempts at biblical cheer kind of descend into this uproar. So again, we're pulling from all these different traditions. They all lead in time to those guys who are shooting the guns, into the air late in the 18th century. So when we hop to Virginia, now we're going to go back to the 18th century. 12th night, so the end of this period of contemplation, is the focus of the secular Christmas season. It's when you see the most sumptuous balls, many guests, feasts lasting several days. They're mounted in the really nicest of homes. College of William and Mary, the school that's there, the grammar school, they shut down over the Christmas holiday, and they only reopen after 12th night. Right. So in fact, that was a tradition in both England and Virginia, is that students would actually shut their teachers or tutors out of the classroom. Right. So when we look at this next tavern scene, what is common is something that was called the sticking of the church with green boughs on Christmas Eve. Okay. Though this is a tavern, I have this picture in here because you can see that the tavern has also been decoratively stuck. So when we talk about decorating the church, we have garlands of holly, ivy, mountain laurel, mistletoe are hung from the church roof, the walls, the pillars, and all of the galleries. The pews and the pulpit and sometimes the altar were bedecked with garlands. So if you were to go into that 18th century church in England or in Virginia, you would have seen a lot of greenery coming inside. Okay. That particular scene of the inside of a church was described by Peter Kalm, who was a Swede who visited Philadelphia in 1749. And on Christmas Day, he wrote that nowhere was Christmas Day celebrated with more solemnity than in the Roman Church. 3 sermons were preached there, and that which contributed most to the splendor of the ceremony was the beautiful music. The pews and the altar were decorated with branches of mountain laurel, whose leaves are green in wintertime and resemble the cherry laurel. I told you all that someone would walk in when I was talking. Right. So in this particular tavern, I want you to look at the windows on the back, and that is mistletoe that has been brought inside, and probably because the window panes are not super tight in an 18th century window, kind of stuck between the pane of glass and the window frame. And then up above the scene, you can see mistletoe, right? Mistletoe becomes a pretty important part of the holiday season. This is a picture of mistletoe that I took, I think, last year up in a tree. Mistletoe is a parasite that grows up in the tops of tall trees, and in order to get it down, you have to shoot it down with your gun. So that's also part of the reason you might hear guns being shot off in and around Christmas Eve. And if you're hanging it above a doorway or above the table, then yes, you are entitled to steal a kiss from whoever is coming under the mistletoe with you. Okay. This is another 18th century print, and you can see the mistletoe that is hanging above the head of the folks who are reveling in the tavern. Like I said before, most of the observances are like raucously secular. It's a winter respite to a mainly agricultural workforce. Their minds and legs were usually dangling a bit in the quiet and dark winter months. So since you can't do a lot of agricultural work in the dead of winter, you've got much more time inside to play and fool around, right? So it really bothers church officials, this kind of vestiges of this pagan merriment. It's going to remain a part of the Christmas celebration. Some of them prayed that the sacred would overtake the profane as pagans gave up their revels and turned to Christianity. But this merrymaking and feasting remains one of the most popular ways to celebrate Christmas in England, and then of course in Virginia. Cotton Mather, who is from Boston, not from Virginia, wrote in 1712 that the feast of Christ's nativity is spent in reveling, dicing, carding, masking, and all licentious liberty, by mad mirth, by long eating, by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, and by rude reveling. Ah, Christmas. So in some southern homes, 12th night, January 6th, was the more festive occasion. An Englishman who was traveling through Williamsburg wrote shortly before the Revolution that it seems that this is one of their annual balls, supported in the following manner. A large, rich cake is provided, cut into small pieces, handed round to the company, who at the same time draws a ticket out of a hat and something Mary wrote on it, and he that draws the king has the honor of treating the company with the ball the next year. And the lady that draws the queen has the trouble of making the cake. And you can see in the print kind of on the lower right-hand side, a great cake. Well, that's actually the detail from this broadside. You can see the great cake. So if you've heard of the tradition of cutting it into pieces and deciding who'll give the party the next year, that was happening in Virginia, as well as in other places. Okay. Okay. So, and then you can see also in this broadside, which is about Christmas, people playing games. There's a very active blind man's bluff going on, and then the different kinds of people who you might see, right, in parties around the Christmas season. Very important part of the Christmas season is the punch bowl, right? Virginia observation of Christmas really tends towards good fellowship and a lot of really good eating. So the Virginia Almanac for 1772 carries these sentiments on the December page, saying this much and much meat will be roasted in men's kitchens, the cooks sweating and making of mince pies and other Christmas cheer, and whole rivers of punch and toddy and wine and beer and cider consumed with drinking. Cards and dice will be greatly used to drive away the tediousness of the long, cold nights, and much money will be lost at whist, cribbage, and all fours. In England, the custom was for an apprentice to visit each of his master's clients to collect tips for his services throughout the year. And this custom is apparently followed in Virginia as well, okay? Where it was common for folks with means to tip out the different people who worked for them, who they had a business, who helped them throughout the year. And it was also common to have to give out tips or kind of end of the year presents from masters to the people whom they had enslaved. well, at least the ones who worked in the Great House. But because it's also the slow time agriculturally, it's also a time when it's a good opportunity to visit with friends and family. It's a very popular time of year to get married. This is a 19th century print that is depicting the marriage of Martha Dandridge Custis to George Washington. Martha Dandridge Custis married George Washington on 12th night, right? Because everybody was already gathered together. Now, we've been talking a lot about Virginia. Some of you are not in Virginia, you're not even in the United States. But for those of you who are joining us from New England, it's a very different situation. Let's go forward, right? The celebration of Christmas was actually outlawed in most of New England for the 17th and certainly 18th century. The Calvinist Puritans and the Protestants absolutely abhorred the entire celebration, and they likened it to pagan rituals and popish observances. And in that, they're not wrong, are they? So in 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts forbade, under penalty of 5 shillings per offense, the observance of any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, so no days off, feasting, or any such way. The Assembly of Connecticut in the same period also prohibits the reading of the Book of Common Prayer, the keeping of Christmas and Saints' days, the making of mince pies, the playing of cards, or performing any musical instruments. And then these statutes are going to remain in force until they're repealed in the early 19th century, right, with the dissolution of the British monarchy. In 1647, the Parliament, right, abolished the celebration of Christmas, and that was in England 40 years after the settlement at Jamestown. So this no Christmas policy was reiterated by Parliament in 1652. So no celebrations in any of the colonies that were under English control. Okay. So Christmas is ignored not only in the 17th century in New England, but well into the 19th century. In fact, Boston public schools were still open on Christmas Day in the 1870s, and missing work on the 25th of December was grounds for dismissal. And then we have Cotton Mather complains vociferously about all of these people who want to take off Christmas as a work day. Now, Christmas is going to, so with the restoration of the monarchy, Christmas comes back to places like Virginia. But it still is frowned upon. It's legal, but it's frowned upon in New England. It becomes a really popular holiday, though, when Queen Victoria ascends to the English throne. So in Williamsburg, the very first tree that is set up in the town was set up by Professor Charles Minnigerode, who decorates a tree. He's in the St. George Tucker House. He's a native of Germany, College of William and Mary professor. He brings this tradition with him when he immigrates to the United States. Nathaniel Beverly Tucker invites Professor Minnigerode to celebrate the holiday season at the Tucker House. And Professor Minnigerode trims this tree with candles and fancy paper decorations as a present for the children. So Beverly Randolph Tucker, who's a descendant who was there at that time, says regular sized candles were cut down and fastened on the tree, nuts were gilded, other ornaments were made, and presents were probably not distributed at the time, but there were songs and games and refreshments. And that was popularized because Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, her German consort Prince Albert, were the first to introduce a Christmas tree into the English holiday tradition. And this was a popular illustration from the period. Okay. So Christmas is going to become more popular, right, or more celebratory during the Victorian era. We transition from the Victorian era into the 20th century, and we have the establishment of Colonial Williamsburg, or the town of Williamsburg becomes a living history museum as the foundation is established and buys different properties throughout the town and works to restore them. Right. The thought process was that people wanted to decorate for the holiday season, okay? And they begin this tradition actually way back in the late 1930s into the 1940s of decorating in the 18th century manner with natural materials. And they have a door decoration contest. In fact, the first historic area residence doorway decoration contest took place in 1937. And these decorations were judged on the criteria of the types of material, creativity, the elements of design, originality, and faithfulness to the spirit of 18th century decorative ideas, and then attention to detail and written information, which was then provided to the judges by the residents. Okay. And so while Colonial Williamsburg first decorates for Christmas in 1936, and then has the door decorating contest in 1937, its first, so the first greenery was these kind of plain wreaths and some running cedar hanging about the governor's palace and the Raleigh Tavern. But it's Mrs. Louise Fisher who was put in charge of all of the flowers and Christmas decorations. She actually researched the traditions to come up with these kind of wreath decorations by driving to the Library of Congress, where she turned up these English and American pictorial examples of decorations. And she uses them as a guide. In 1939, she's published a book about Della Robbia wreaths, and they're attracting a lot of attention, and the Williamsburg Christmas look is kind of launched. Okay. So no one really expected anyone to visit this newly restored Colonial Williamsburg during the holidays if it had colored lights or these sorts of things happening. But as they begin to every year go forward with more greenery and the candles in the windows and things like that, it becomes pretty popular destination to celebrate Christmas, and it becomes this new kind of spin on this tradition. All right, so like I said, the first place decorated was the governor's palace. We just saw fireworks. Right? The fireworks were popular in the 18th century. They're fired in honor of the monarch's birthday or a great victory. And it's in 1957, as part of the celebration for the 350th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, that Colonial Williamsburg sets off fireworks on Market Square. And since then, fireworks have been an integral part of the Colonial Williamsburg Christmas experience. So grand illumination, where they set off fireworks in a couple of different places in town. Right? So picture of the governor's palace, which I kind of like, this old postcard, because you can also see that there are these boxwood that have been, that are down around the doorway. Boxwood is an important Christmas decoration, right? Holly and ivy, box and bay, all in the church on Christmas Day. Right? You also make an effort in the 18th century to have certain kinds of food that correspond to what's available at that time of year. So if we look at the kinds of foods that are popular to have in the holiday season, a lot of them correspond to things that were seasonally available to people in the 18th century, like nuts, dried fruits, not so many fresh green vegetables, but things like ham, because it's been salted, you know, maybe different kinds of fowl, because they're usually readily available. Breads, puddings, you sort of see how that's playing out. So the idea of what is available to you seasonally. Okay. One of the reasons I have this picture, which is from an 18th century cookbook, of the table arrangement. You see the first course at the top and the second course at the bottom, that it is symmetrically arranged. So you have the first course with these 4 different dishes. Those will be consumed, removed, and then the second course will be set to replace those dishes. When we say symmetrical, it is the same size and the same shape, kind of rotating across the center axis. And that concept of symmetry, very important in 18th century design, and we're going to see it repeated in the way that we're decorating for the holiday season. Okay. This next picture is a picture of me. Long time ago, when I lived in the historic area and, according to the terms of the lease, had to decorate the house for the holiday season. And so if you don't decorate the house, you're in violation of your lease. So my roommate, who is the person on the other side, actually I had two roommates, we spent a lot of time decorating our door and also the windows. And we intentionally copied the layout of an 18th century table. So up here, you can see table. Then here you can see how we did our wreath. And there's a big center wreath. And then there's two wreaths kind of going on the opposite axis on either side, and they are both the same. So the one that's predominantly yellow, that is yarrow and walnuts. And then the ones that have white on it, those are little pearl onions. What we're looking for is color and symmetry. So this custom of fixing fruits and vegetables and dried flowers and herbs and other plant life to these basic Christmas forms like wreaths and swags and roping traces its roots to the early years of the 20th century, when Christmas is growing in significance kind of across the country. And the colonial revival design aesthetic is pulling all these decorative impulses back towards the 18th century. So when Williamsburg opens as a museum and it becomes very popular in culture, you start seeing a lot of colonial influences in decorating and architecture, and that's the colonial revival period. Okay. A 1926 issue of House Beautiful is the first 20th century publication to illustrate this kind of a fruit-laden wreath, and it explains that of late years, besides the staple wreaths of plain greens to which we have long been accustomed, the holiday emblems have blossomed forth, or perhaps we should say fruited forth, with richness of color produced by the use of natural or artificial fruit as embellishment. So it's undoubtedly suggested by these gorgeous Italian carvings and terracottas of the Renaissance, right? And they're really talking about Della Robbia in that particular publication. Okay. So another way to decorate is like pulling these natural materials, the things that are still green at this time of year. This is an image of berries. And here you can see someone who has used those same berries in their wreath. Okay. Holly, of course, is abundant and beautiful and plentiful. And here you can see a little hint of holly in a wreath to tell her to be quiet, right? Okay. These are 3 wreaths that I pulled pictures of from doors, and I like to look at them and start to break down the design aesthetic, okay? So in each of these different wreaths, so there's a lot happening, right? But if you look at them as segments, you can see that they're really employing this idea of symmetry, right? So if we go over here to the one on the far right, there, you see these little cotton bowls and here are arranged on either side of the pomegranates, and then there's little berries on top and the bottom. And you can see that they are on an axis across from each other. This middle wreath is a little bit more complicated, but equally symmetrical. So they have cut a pine cone up here to be the top element with pine cones around it. See this pine cones, pine cones, pine cones, pine cones. And then there are 3 sets of little oranges, or probably maybe those are little clementines. So you get a little bit of extra color that way, but they're alternating. And this one is kind of fun too, because you have a single pine cone. Those are apples that are the element, and those are shells, probably clam shells, that are kind of decorating each of them. So they're almost like flower petals, right? I used shells last year in my wreath, and you can drill holes in them as long as you get the masonry bit for your drill. Right? And you have a lot of patience. And then they're filling it out with these different kinds of complementary colors. Right? So wishing you peace, joy, and prosperity for you and your family. Have a Merry Christmas. And now we're going to stop the share. All right. So before we move in to how to make a wreath, does anyone have any questions? I'm going to look here in the Q&A where I see we have all kinds of people from this local area. Great.
I'm looking as well, Liz.
All right.
That was really fascinating. I would have never thought that the Colonial Williamsburg Christmas tradition had such a interesting start. Whenever I think of Christmas, I think of Colonial Williamsburg.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything else as you kind of roll through time, right, is that you have, different things get brought into the celebration. Or they like to say that Rudolph was not always one of the reindeer, right? Okay. So some of you are interested in how to make a wreath. Oh, so we have Jan who's going to be greening the church next week. So we see that tradition lives on. Okay.
Right,
so I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques for making a couple of different kinds of wreaths. For those of you who are feeling crafty or who don't feel like you want to spend a lot of money on some of these Christmas supplies. I'm going to show you a couple different things. Okay. Starting with a wreath that I made last week. So this one I'm just going to hold up to show you. Okay. This is a holly wreath. Let's see if I can switch to my downward facing camera. Whoops. This is one of my favorite kinds of wreaths to make. Right? You can almost see it. It's a little bit hard. Let's go back to the upward facing camera. Okay. And it uses a technique that I'm going to use over and over and over in making wreaths. So you can see it's holly that is bunched in a circle. Okay. I have a holly tree in my yard, so it's relatively easy for me to make this particular wreath. Okay. So I make a lot of them every year. Okay. So I'll go out into the yard and I will cut sprigs of holly. Okay. And then I have a couple of different kinds of wire. I either use the narrow floral wire that I can get from any craft store. I also I did a project a number of years ago for the Radio and Television Museum, and I had to actually buy the wire that you use in electronics. So that's what this is. I got it from Radio Shack, if it tells you how long I've had this in my supply cabinet. And it's just really thin wire that you use to twist together these bundles of holly. And then these go on a green foam circle. I got this from the dollar store, right? The Dollar Tree, soon to be the $1.25 tree. And I use it every year, that's why it has holes in it. And you fix the holly to the form using this little floral pin. It's called a greening pin, You should be able to get those from craft stores, but if you can't, then I have an alternative for you. So as you pin the holly on, this is also the same way that you would make, say, a boxwood wreath, by the way. Anything that you want to have be kind of layered, that kind of fullness, and you work your way around the circle. If you can't find greening pins, I have discovered that you can either make your own greening pins with heavier gauge floral wire, or you can take apart a bobby pin or a hairpin, and you can use that in the same way. You may need to shorten it a little bit, but that'll help keep it all together. So you sort of work your way around the wreath until you get to the end, and each one is layered one on top of the other. Depending on the climate that you live in, this may get kind of dry. So I like to soak it a little bit before it first goes up. And just like the folks who live in the historic area at Colonial Williamsburg, I'm going to have to switch this out midway through the holiday season because they do dry out. Want to be a little bit more fancy about it. I went out and I have a scourge of ivy that is in my yard. I don't know why they planted this however many years ago before I lived here, because it is slowly choking some of the trees, but it is very authentic to the holiday season. And you can decorate a little bit more if you wanted to by kind of wrapping it around to give you a little bit of different texture. Okay. I'm going to switch now from that's a pretty easy wreath to make pretty fast. I've started another wreath for you today, right? This is a wreath that I'm going to put on my front door when it's finished. I did most of this one yesterday or last night. Okay. This wreath is constructed on a frame. So I also got this frame from the dollar store. Okay. Wonderful source of craft supplies. And this, I'm going to switch to the other camera now. So you can look straight down at it. Okay. So what I like about this one is the different shapes and shades of greenery that are inside the wreath. So the main component of this wreath is the bits that came off that I got at the Christmas tree lot. So you see the Christmas tree, there's a Christmas tree behind me. They cut off the bottom few branches, and I wired those together in kind of in different sections like I did for the holly. So here you can see one bundle of 3 different of these fir branches, but I've also wired in a little bit of lavender. So I have a lot of lavender in my yard, and what I like, not just the smell, but that it's a slightly different color of greenery, okay? So I have bundles of lavender and that pine tree, and then I alternated that with bundles, still from the Christmas tree, and a little bit of juniper, because I have a lot of juniper in my yard too. And this juniper is a slightly different shape, and you can see the pretty little blueberries here. Okay. So this is made by layering, and I've done this also in an alternating way, so it also will wind up to be symmetrical when it's finished. Okay. So I'll show you how I put it together, because as soon as I get it together, then I can put it back on my door. So I'm going to cut a little bit of floral wire. The last one that I put on had the lavender on it. So now I'm going to switch to the juniper. I'm going to lay the juniper here on top of the frame, the wire. Take my floral wire. Oh, maybe I want to point out, this that's holding it together is not actually floral wire. It's twist tie, right? So if you've ever gone to the garden store and you can get these really long lengths of, it's like a long length of twist tie that I can cut into sections. And that's just a lot easier to work with because it's coated in plastic. You could probably just use twist ties if you wanted to, because you're not going to really see the bits that are holding the bunches together, because they're all going to be covered because of the way you're putting it together. So here I have the wire going on. You try and make it tight, pull it back to the other side, flip it over. I have lots of different kinds of pliers because I also like to make jewelry. So I have pliers to cut wire. I have pliers to twist wire. If you don't want to invest in a lot of pliers, you can just invest in a regular old plier that has the cutting edge. I got these yesterday for $3 because somebody in my household took my other ones. Couldn't find them, so I had to get new ones. Don't know what they were doing with them, but they disappeared. All right, so let me keep going with this. I put on the juniper. Now I'm over here with the lavender one. Put that onto the frame. Twist tie it on to the frame so it's relatively secure. You like it to be secure. But since I'm going to put it on the window or the door, probably the window, it's not going to move around a whole lot. And that will be super helpful. Okay. And then you see we get to the end. One last piece. It's going to slot in there very nicely and easily. Again, this time I'm going to go from the top and on through and twist tie it onto the back. So see, twist tying onto the back. You can see what the back looks like. And this particular wreath is now finished. So, but it's not finished. I'm going to switch the camera view again so you can see it a little bit better from further away. Okay, there you go. A finished wreath. But I like the idea of, see, I like the way it looks because of the different repeating, because of the symmetry of it. But I think it could use just a little bit more. So I went out and I gathered some pine cones. Okay. And then I put the pine cones onto a floral pin. I'm going to take the pine cone and just stick it into this frame. I think I'm going to do it kind of between, whoops, going back to the downward view so you can see it a little bit better. Right. So it's got this pin, there's a piece of wire that's stuck to the pin, and I'm just going to put it right there. Here's another pine cone attached to this pin, and I'm going to put it in, and stick it if I can into one of those bundles. And if I want to, see, again, I'm going to go between the blue. So as I work my way around, do this one again, I now have, again, those repeating elements. Those floral pins, you buy them also from the craft store. So it's this piece of, they look like this piece of green wood. So you can get across the background. There's a little piece of wire attached to it. I won't lie to you, these can be kind of hard to find unless you have a specialty garden shop. But I experimented, and you can achieve the same thing if you have one of wooden skewer. You cut off, this is a wooden skewer that I cut off, and then I attached a piece of that real thin radio wire or floral wire, and then you can attach that to your pine cone, okay? And then use that to attach into the wreath and kind of work your way around. I did a similar thing with bits of holly. So I attached the bits of holly to a floral pin. And if I wanted to, I could add a little bit more texture by also putting those into the wreath and kind of working my way around. So now I'm going to change the view so I can hold up and show you all what it looks like. So here we are on our way to having, oh, it's like hard to see the green wreath in front of the green tree. A kind of pretty, very natural, pretty easy wreath I think will look nice on my front door, and because I have kind of a light colored house, I think it'll be pretty visible from the street. Great.
That's awesome.
All right, any questions about that? Oh, and I should probably point out, because see, Robert asked me this question, like, how much money did I spend on this wreath? And well, I spent $1 on the frame. And all of these pins and little sticks are from last year. And like I said, this is from my Christmas tree, this is from my yard, this is from my yard, and this is from the elementary school down the street and around the corner. So this was $1.
Okay, so we still owe you $1.
Yeah, you owe me $1, but since I get to enjoy, I'm going to keep it though and use it again next year. Okay, so I'm going to show you all one last technique where I'm not making the wreath from scratch. This wreath is fake. I bought this a number of years ago, totally fake wreath. And this I like to use every year because no one is ever going to know from the street that it's a fake wreath, and I'm not going to tell them. This year, I want to use something that's kind of eye-catching. So I'm going to make a wreath that has lemons on it. I'm kind of excited about a little bit of yellow this year. So this is a piece of floral wire. It's going to be a little bit more heavier than what I need. Stick the lemon with the floral wire here. Okay, right? Put the whole thing down through, oh, and it smells really good, by the way, through the center of the wreath. Tie it off on the back. Right. Right. My goodness, how easy is that? I'm going to get a second piece of floral wire. I'm not going to do the whole wreath, by the way, because it will probably take me at least 20 minutes to do this wreath. And I think once you all see how to stick a lemon, you don't need to see me stick all 7 lemons, right? You just get the idea that what I'm going to do with this one is the same idea of symmetry. I think I'm going to do, we used to say we should lay things out on the wreath before you get too deeply into it, because once you started sticking lemons, it's hard to stop. So I think this one I'm going to have, can I lift this up a little bit? 1, 2, 3, 5 lemons, because in design, odd things look pretty good. So that means that there'll be one at the top, and then they'll be slightly offset. If I can get this camera up a little higher so you can see it. Whee! You see what that's going to look like? One at the top, here, 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 and here, because odd things look really good. Right. And once I have them sort of figured out where I'm going to place them, I can go back to affixing them with the floral wire. Now the lemon or any citrus fruit is going to work out well for the whole season because it will dry. And the nice thing about it drying is that we'll keep its color and it won't get moldy. It'll still be good. Now the last thing I'm going to do with this wreath, I also spent some time last night stringing cranberries on really thin wire. So I had to actually stick a safety pin to make the hole through the cranberries, and then string it and kind of tie a little knot both at the top and the bottom. Right? So I can affix this to the wreath. Let me go back in this particular instance and use that floral pin again. I'm trying to do it fast so you all can see it. And since this is kind of got a really good area to stick it into to start with, and I think for this particular wreath, I'm gonna kind of work around and use, I don't want to go around and around and around. I want to use kind of some of these, since it's a fake wreath, I can do this. There's wires inside. I can kind of wrap it around these wired branches, if you will, and they'll be fine to stay where they need to stay. I'll take advantage of the fact that it's fake. Right. I'm going to lift the camera up so you can get kind of a better view of it. And then you start to see how pretty I think the yellow and the red are going to be. Okay. Put that back. I'm going to switch the camera. Hold it up. Right. So it's going to start to look something like that, right? And then I can dress this one up as I go along, just that little bit of maybe the holly that can be stuck in there, kind of looks something different. I love magnolia because here in Virginia, a lot of magnolia trees. And so I also have some, not actually magnolia leaf because I couldn't find one, but you get the idea that if you have something sort of that size and shape, you can also start to work your way around the wreath and get a little bit of extra texture. I got some cotton bowls from the Dollar Tree this year. Those also would look really pretty on a wreath like this because then you start to get those little pops of white. I like using walnuts because, again, it's like a different shade and it's pretty easy to drill a hole through a walnut and then use the wire to put it through and then put it onto the wreath itself. So when you're designing something like this style of wreath, I think what you want to look at are that sense of how to make it so it's visually pleasing, that the elements themselves are repetitive across the wreath. So you're looking at this idea of the smallest possible element, and then that it's all on some kind of a center accent. So even though I'm going to use an odd number of lemons on this wreath, it's still coming down through a center axis this way and then this way. And that is a very traditional 18th century way of doing design. When the season's over, take it all down, throw away all the greenery, or put it into my compost bin. Super cheap. I always save the materials so I have them for next year. And then next year I'll do something that's a little bit different. Okay. So we are like 2 minutes past 5, and I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions about anything I've talked about. And then if I can, pick it back up again and show it to you.
So when life hands you some lemons, you should make a lemon wreath.
Yeah. Yes.
So when life hands you lemons, you don't need to make just lemonade anymore. You can now make a lemon wreath.
Make a lemon wreath.
There were some questions I'll send to you that came in earlier.
Okay.
Jan asked, did you get a prize for your design that year?
We did not, because we were so over the top. Yeah, we were like the fan favorite, but we did not get a prize because we were a little over the top. Okay. But it was super fun.
And then some of these questions came in earlier, so you kind of talked about a few of these things a little bit. But Jessica asked, what is the more popular wreath base? Greenery / fir, holly, grapevine, etc.
I think that the fir, like the Fraser fir, is probably just about the easiest to get. And it's also kind of the most forgiving when you put something on top of it. Like, I love the boxwood wreaths and I like the holly wreaths, but that's all you have. Like, if you're going to do a holly wreath, it's just holly, right? You can't really decorate something on top of it.
Okay. And then let's see, Carolyn asked, this question also from a while ago, do you use any glue to hold the wreath items?
I actually don't, because if you wire it in, it should stay in. And that's where I think it's important to use, your pliers. And it's a simple machine, right? So you twist it until it gets to be pretty tight. If the wire is too thin for you to work with, again, like that Garden Supply, really long coil of the green twist tie, this is super easy to use. And I have the little wire cutting pliers, but then also just like the all-purpose pliers also have the wire cutting element. I really like this stuff, even though it gets tangled, because it is so easy to use.
Yeah, you're getting quite a few compliments on the lemon wreath, so that was a big fan hit. What about bugs? I mean, I would imagine bugs might be a concern, but if you buy an outdoor Christmas tree or a natural wreath and bring it in your house, it's going to be the same kind of concern, right?
Yeah, it would. And these are going to go outside. Like, these are going to go, this one will go like, this one might go on my door. And I think I'll put the holly wreaths on my windows. So I don't really care if there's bugs outside. Now, when I lived in the historic area, we did sometimes get birds and squirrels would peck at things. But I think that's because they were socialized to the December feasts that went on the doors every year. I'm not going to worry too much about that this year, here in the suburbs.
Someone wants to know if they can buy your lemon wreath from you. So.
It's so easy.
Yeah, website,
so easy.
liz'swreaths.com. Place your order.
No, I promise you it is super easy. Go, seriously, buy the fake wreath, so you have it every year. Just stick the wire through the lemons, twist them on. You can even buy, I think you can even buy the fake, this is real. I mean, this is a real cranberry, but it was pretty tedious to put together. But you could buy the fake cranberry. The rule, when I lived in the historic area, the rule was you had to use natural materials that had a passing resemblance to something that was available to people in the 18th century. So you couldn't put like a bow on your wreath, even though people had ribbon, you weren't really supposed to decorate with bows. And it was really, it's supposed to be natural materials. It's kind of gotten a little bit, they've really stretched it out a bit since then. The rules have really relaxed, but I saw some beautiful ones. But there's this one lady who lived down the street who made little gingerbread men. You know, like, remember like the little salt dough that you made in 2nd grade? And you use those as Christmas tree ornaments. She made hundreds of those, and then she tied those to a garland that she put on a fence every year, and she just continued to rotate them.
That's interesting. Let's see. Yeah. Someone actually asked about if ribbons were a no-no.
Well, I mean, they were available.
Depends on if you're in a competition, right? Yeah. Or if not, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, and it's like where you live. You can, it's your wreath. You can do whatever you want to your wreath. It doesn't even have to be a Christmas wreath. It can just be a seasonal wreath. These are the kinds of things that are like pretty and available in my yard right now.
Someone asked about how long do cranberries last for?
I will find out. I think they would last longer if it was colder. My problem is that it is not going to be real cold here for most of the season. So that's going to be a problem. But if it was continuously 40 degrees, they'd last a long time.
And then let's see, got a request if you can, two different people asked, one asked if you can, if you can do the lemon again, and then also the pine cone. Okay,
so here's the lemon. Here is a piece of floral wire. I got this from Michael. This is stem wire, and it's 18 gauge. So usually the smaller the number, the thicker the wire. So 18 gauge is a thicker wire than say 24 gauge. So I'm just sticking the wire straight through the lemon, all the way to the middle, folding it over. I'm going to take that and put it into the wreath. Oops, better change the camera so you can see it. On the way down. Turn it around. Okay, so I stuck the wire into the wreath. Now I'm going to flip it over so you can see the back. There's this metal frame here. Oh, one of my fell on the floor. See, so it's kind of going through the frame. Then all I have to do is twist it. That's it. And now the lemon is decoratively stuck to your wreath. Okay. Now, obviously, I need to go in and do a little bit more securing of these things, right? Before I hang it up. I'm just trying to go kind of fast so you all can see the technique, right? That's going to stay really well. And then the other question was about the floral picks. So let me get.
And also the pine cones. Someone asked if you could show the pine cone again.
Okay. So here is, right. So here's a pine cone. Picked up the pine cone, right? And this one already has a tick off. So this has a piece of wire. Can you see it better on top of the lemon? Right. So there's a piece of wire. It's a pretty long piece of wire that came on the pick. I'm just going to wrap it around the pine cone as much as it will go. And then I'm going to take the pine cone and stick it. In this case, I took it off a different wreath. I'll just stick it into this wreath, and it just goes into like a fat part of the wreath. because there's usually enough greenery in here where it can kind of catch on something. So it's just really just sticking in like that. Yes. And as I said before, if you can't find these, because they can be challenging, I'm pretty sure you can make one with shish kebab skewers and a lot of wire. Okay.
What about another question? Are there any particular books you can recommend for Williamsburg-style wreath ideas?
Oh gosh, go to the Williamsburg bookstore online, and they should have lots of different wreaths. Really, just look at the pictures, because I think what's important is not, it's probably, they've done a couple of publications that tell you how to do it. I should have pulled it off my bookcase and had it ready to show you. But once you've figured out like how to do it, and it's really just make bundles of things, layer the bundles on top of each other so you can't see the wire, and then continue to just fix them onto your form. That's really all it is. And then stick things into the wreath or wire them onto the wreath, hopefully in a way that they're not so very visible. What you want to think about is the design piece of it, like what is the color that you're using, and then how is it balanced? And if you want to be really complicated, break it down into the smallest possible units of complication. Yeah. Are they okay for indoor use with the real fruit? They're fine. They're fine. Okay. Again, if your house is not too dry, and sometimes your house is going to get real dry because the heat comes on and it sucks all the moisture out of it. But you can tell the fruit's not going to mold. It's just going to get dry.
It's too bad we don't have a way to do this. We should have people submit their photos and we'd give them a prize, whoever got the best design. But maybe we'll do that next year.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, go home, make your wreath, and send us the picture. And if you win, you get a
well, people can do that. They could post to the Facebook page, right?
Oh yeah, I guess they could, or the meetup page.
Yeah, they could definitely, or you could post. Go make a wreath and post a picture to the meetup page for this presentation so we can see all the wreaths. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's not a competition because they're all beautiful.
First prize, round trip to Hawaii. I mean, no, that's the other contest. Right. What other types of fruits do you recommend?
Yeah.
Nancy?
This year I like lemons. Last year I used clementines because I'm looking for something with color. Apples can be really nice too, but if you're going to use the apples, you want to try and find really small apples. Like a lot of apples today are bred to be like super huge, so you try and find the smaller ones because you want them to be in scale to your wreath. And pomegranates are also very popular. If you were to cut
now, those are pretty heavy pomegranates.
They are. That would be for a big wreath. But if you can also cut the pomegranate and dry it, okay, so that takes care of some of the weight a little bit, and you get this really pretty kind of like that pattern on the inside is really pretty. Last year, I dried the orange rinds, the orange peels. And that worked out really well too. And I cut them into like little shapes. It was kind of complex, but it was fun. And then let's see, what other kinds of, kind of it with the fruit. Because like a pear is actually gonna go rotten pretty fast, but an apple, especially if it's cold, will hold up for a while. Mm-hmm. Oh, and of course the pineapple is the colonial hospitality symbol, but that's a big heavy thing. Yeah. Magnolia. Try and use like dried material if you can. My son gave me roses for Mother's Day and I dried those, and I was thinking of using the roses in a wreath. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, that's nice. Mm-hmm. Miniature pomegranates, we got a suggestion.
Yeah.
And lady apples was another suggestion.
Yeah. Oh, the year I did walnuts and yarrow, I also used golden raisins.
Ah.
Now that Golden raisin, very easy, by the way, to string a golden raisin.
Dragon fruits and crab apples, more suggestions.
Yes.
Boy, this is a creative group. They're throwing out all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah.
We should have met in person. Everyone would bring their stuff with them. Hey, I'll trade you a lemon for a... We'll do that post-COVID, maybe.
Yeah, post-COVID, we'll have an in-person workshop, and you'll have to bring your wreath forms, and we'll trade materials.
Let's see. I think that's about doing it on the questions. For the wreath. Yeah, I think that does it for the questions. So, okay. If anything else to add in closing?
I think that's it. I hope everyone has a wonderful, healthy, and safe December holiday season. Whether you celebrate Christmas or not, I really encourage you to bring some greenery into your life because it makes you feel happy, right? And it cheers everything up when the sky is all gray, and especially if you're someplace where it snows. So do just like our ancestors did and bring some green inside your house, some happiness, right?
Awesome. Are there any particular holiday things you're looking forward to this season? Like for myself, during the holiday break, I always try and get caught up on reading all the books that I purchased throughout the year that didn't get a chance to read.
Do you make it through?
I make a dent. I just try and make a dent.
Okay.
What about yourself? Any particular holiday things you're looking forward to?
We went to the Scottish Walk in Alexandria yesterday. So we saw
that's the parade.
For us, the traditional parade that kicks off the holiday season here. Lots of dogs and kids and bagpipe bands, and it was a ton of fun. So now it's officially like the holiday season.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Well, thanks, Liz. Thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge with us, and you have a great holiday. Talk to you sometime in the future. And then can you tell us about the book talks that the Army Museum is doing again?
So the National Army Museum does a book talk the third Thursday of every month. The next one will be a week from this Thursday, and I will do a good job and post the information about that on the meetup group either tonight or probably tomorrow morning.
I also posted the Army Museum link in the chat.
Yes.
Awesome.
So we'll be expanding in the new year too.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend. Stay safe. Happy Sunday and happy holidays. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks everyone. Take care. Especially thanks to Liz. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.